The man sitting across from me in my boardroom was someone I had not seen in 15 years, a man who once told me that I would never amount to anything more than a common laborer. His name was Robert Miller, a man who built his entire identity on the prestige of his family name and the corner offices he occupied. When I was just 23, desperate and trying to start my own construction business, he looked me in the eye at his mahogany dining table and told me that people like me were born to work for people like him, not the other way around. He dismissed my ambitions as a foolish fantasy and made it clear that my presence in his daughter's life was an insult to their social standing. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning resolve to prove his assessment of my character entirely wrong. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Years of relentless work followed, turning my hands callous and my mind sharp as I built my company, Sterling Foundations, from the ground up in the heart of Chicago. I spent nights in drafty offices and days hauling materials, driven by the memory of Robert Miller's arrogant smirk and the way he treated those he considered beneath him. I hired people who, like my father, believed that a man's worth is measured by his commitment to his word rather than his title. By the time I turned 40, Sterling Foundations had become a landmark of integrity in the construction industry, managing federal contracts and employing hundreds of dedicated souls. I had achieved everything he claimed I couldn't, yet I never sought him out. I didn't need to. I was too busy building a legacy that required no validation from the likes of him, focusing instead on the honest sweat and hard work that my father taught me to value above all else. The turning point arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning when my chief of operations, Marcus, placed a folder on my desk with a heavy, deliberate silence. I opened the file to find the name Sarah Miller at the top of an application for a senior project manager position. She was the woman I had once loved, the woman who had stood by while her father dismantled my dignity in that cold dining room. Her resume was professional, clean, and impressive, showing years of experience in the very field I had fought to master. I looked at Marcus, who remained perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. We both knew the weight of this moment. My company was built on a foundation of strict policy and unwavering standards, and the sudden appearance of my past in this form felt like a test of everything I had spent 2 decades establishing for myself. The interview process was handled by my HR department with absolute precision, exactly as I insisted for every other candidate. I watched from my office, feeling a strange detachment as I observed the lobby area. Robert Miller was there, pacing back and forth in a suit that looked as though it had seen better decades. He was no longer the imposing giant of my memories. He looked small, fraying at the edges, a man clinging to the ghost of his former relevance. He kept asking the receptionist to speak with the owner, his voice carrying that same haughty cadence that used to make me shrink. But now, it sounded like a desperate plea for attention. I watched him from the shadows of my office, realizing that he had no idea he was standing in the very building that stood as a testament to the man he had once tried to destroy. As the morning progressed, the atmosphere in the building grew heavy with the weight of unresolved history. My staff moved with their usual efficiency, unaware that the man who had once mocked their employer was pacing just a few feet away. I spent those minutes in my office holding a small, framed memento from my childhood, a modest achievement that meant more to me than any of Robert's accolades ever could. It was a reminder of my origin, of the cold winters in Ohio, and of the man who taught me that true power is never about the things you own, but about the promises you keep. I knew that whatever happened next, I would not allow his past influence to dictate the future of my firm. I would handle this with the same calm resolve I applied to every contract I signed, ensuring that my company's reputation remained untarnished. When the time came to face him, I stepped out into the lobby, and the sound of my footsteps seemed to command a silence that reached every corner of the room. Robert stopped his pacing, his eyes widening as he recognized me. He looked from my face to the directory on the wall, and the realization washed over him, draining the remaining color from his cheeks. His wife, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Sarah, appearing from the interview room, froze where she stood, her eyes locking onto mine with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The lobby felt like a vacuum, the air thick with the history of a decade I had buried beneath layers of hard work and quiet success. There was no need for insults or grand declarations. The reality of the situation spoke louder than any words we could have exchanged. I let the moment linger, watching as the man who once deemed me a failure struggled to find his voice. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by a realization of his own obsolescence. He was a man who had staked his life on the idea that he was at the top of the world, only to find that the world had moved on without him. I stood there, not as a victim of his past cruelty, but as the master of my own destiny. My decision was already made, guided by the same principles of fairness and objectivity that governed my entire organization. I had no interest in petty retribution. I simply wanted to ensure that the integrity of Sterling foundations remained intact, protected from the complications of a life I had long since outgrown. In the end, Sarah was not offered the position. Her qualifications were strong, but the conflict of interest was undeniable, and my HR department followed the protocols we had established to keep our operations clean. I watched as they left the building, Robert walking a step behind his daughter, his shoulders hunched in a way that signaled a quiet, permanent defeat. They left behind no chaos, no mess, just the quiet reality of a path that had diverged years ago. I returned to my office and closed the door, feeling not a sense of triumph, but a profound clarity. My father was right. A man's value is not in his title, but in his ability to show up for the life he has built. The past had finally come full circle, and I was exactly where I was meant to be, standing on the foundation I had laid with my own 2 hands.